Hi guys, my name is Blake, welcome. And today I'm giving you my September wrap-up. I have attempted to film this 3 times. I pressed the record button and I thought it was recording. I don't know if it stopped or if I didn't press it, but I did that not once, but twice. So this is my 3rd attempt. Hopefully it works. But in the month of September, I managed to read 9 books. And of those 9 books, I had quite a mix of genres in both adult and YA categories. My dog's walking around in the background. Sorry if you hear him. He wants to chase large tree rodents. Yeah, so he's been out chasing them all morning, and if I say the word, he'll just go berserk. So I'm not gonna say it. But getting back on track, I first started with Anatomy, a Love Story, and Immortality, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz. And this is a duology following our main character, Hazel, who wants to become a doctor, but she lives in Scotland in a time period when women are not allowed to be doctors. So she makes a deal with her professor, and she agrees that if she can pass his test without attending his classes, then he will let her join the medical college. But in order to do this, she needs to study actual human bodies. So she hires Jack, who is a resurrection man, and she hires him to steal some bodies for her. And there may or may not be paranormal things going on in the story. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. I think Hazel was a great character. I loved her determination and just how dedicated she was to her love of science and wanting to be a doctor, even though everyone tells her that she can't be one. And she really lives in this time period where it's kind of unheard of, and she is kind of a joke to a lot of people, and she is not deterred at all. And I just thought that she was such a great character. Jack was also another really great character. He was definitely very much the opposite of Hazel, I think, in a lot of ways. He was very much a cinnamon roll character, if you will. But I really enjoyed following their stories. I was originally put off from this book because of the love story aspect of the title. And I feel like in a lot of YA books, when there is a romance introduced, it really detracts from the plot. And the love story takes over, and that's not what I enjoy. But don't worry, that's not the case here. There is some romance in this, but it's very minimal. It takes a backseat to the story. The love story that the title is referring to is actually her love of anatomy, which is very cool. And I think that there were so many great things going on in the story. We had people are disappearing. There is a plague. Hazel is dealing with a lot in her personal life as her brother is recently deceased. Her mom is grieving and she wants to force Hazel into a marriage. There's a lot going on, and I think that the story had a lot going for it. I will say, though, that this book is not anything new or unusual. All this is very familiar. I have read stories like this before, but that didn't detract from my enjoyment. I also think that it was very atmospheric. It did have those fall vibes that I was really looking for when I picked it up. And I will say that the end does have a cliffhanger, which I normally hate, but I really loved how this book ended, and I really enjoyed how the cliffhanger was done in this one. Now, getting to its sequel, I did not like this book at all. I gave it 2 stars. I feel like this book could have been a novella. Hazel, actually none of the characters in this felt like themselves. Hazel isn't doing any doctoring, or she's not doing very much medical studying in this one. The first book does have autopsy scenes, and it is a little gory. But I used to be an autopsy assistant, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the story. I thought it was well done. In this one, we're not doing any of that stuff. So I didn't really know what we were doing. The plot was really watered down, and it was almost feels like it was not what I was expecting it to be. The back of the story pitches it as like she's sucked into a world of political intrigue and she gets caught up in court politics. There really wasn't very much of that. Also, there was a love triangle introduced in this one, which I absolutely hated because I really liked the romantic relationship of book 1. And I don't think the love triangle was done well. And I just wasn't here for it. Also, there wasn't really anything atmospheric. There weren't fall vibes in this one. And the cliffhanger at the end of book 1, the thing that I was really curious about to see how it would resolve, it's mentioned a couple times in book 2, but it doesn't really get addressed until 3/4 of the way into it. And by that point, I didn't really even care. So I feel like this book just dragged. There was one aspect that I did like, and I don't really know how to talk about it without getting into spoilers, but essentially that thing from book 1 that may or may not be paranormal was present in book 2. And I did enjoy that aspect, and I wish that that was what we were exploring here, but we ended up going in a completely different direction, and I wasn't too thrilled about it. So overall, I wish I had just stopped at book 1. The next book I read is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. And this one was a pleasant surprise for me. It is a booktube darling. I'm sure it needs no introduction. I have seen this book literally everywhere. I feel like it is a very well-loved series. I know a lot of people have it on their favorites list of all time. I have never read it though, and I was excited to pick it up with the newest release coming out. And I did have a great time with this. I really enjoyed that we're following morally gray characters. I loved the idea of these alternate Londons and kind of how the politics works between these Londons. I also loved how Kel wears the magic coat. I did really enjoy that aspect. We don't really explore the magic system very often, which was a shame because I wanted to know more about it. And we got minor glimpses of it, but I'm hoping that we get more of it as the series progresses. I really liked how cutthroat Lila was as a character, and she is definitely a very morally gray character, and I did really enjoy reading from her perspectives, even though at times I did find her very unlikable, but I do like an unlikable character, so I was very intrigued throughout this. Now, I also, speaking of unlikable characters, I was really intrigued by the villains of this book. But towards the end there, things went a bit downhill for me. I wanted to see more. I was expecting more from the finale. I wanted the villains to have more development because I was really interested in them, and they didn't. I feel like things wrapped up a little too quickly, a little too easily. And after reading it, like, I'm almost not sure that what we are told is true. Like, I'm really interested in maybe seeing if these villains will play a role again in books 2 and 3. Is that a spoiler? I don't know. I don't think it is. Just something about that ending made me think of Mistborn: The Final Empire, where I was like, oh, okay, that was different. I wasn't expecting the villain to do that or say that. Is there something bigger going on here that I don't see yet? And that's essentially how I felt about the end of this one as well with those villains. Next, I have Assistant to the Villain. And boy, I really don't even know. I don't know how to talk about this one. So I read it in one sitting. It's about 300 pages. And in this book, we are following Evie Sage, and she is living in this medieval world, and she's having a hard time finding a job. And she has a rough home life, and her father is sick, and she has to take care of her sister, and she is getting desperate. So she stumbles across the villain, that's all he's called for most of the book, and he offers her a job as his personal assistant. And desperately needing the money, she agrees to do it. And I feel like I picked up this book purely because of that title. And I don't even know. I feel like when I read it in one sitting, and like it was fine. Like I didn't really know how to feel about it. So initially I just put it in the 3-star group, because anytime I don't know how to feel about a book or I have mixed feelings, that's where it goes. But the more I have talked about it with family and friends and just seen other people chatting about it online, this book is really not what I was expecting. And I feel like my enjoyment as I have stepped away from this book has significantly decreased. And that's because I was talking to a friend on Bookstagram about it, and it occurred to me that there really wasn't anything about this book that I liked. And so I've ended up giving it 2 stars. And I saw a lot of like hype about this book before it came out. There was a lot of chatter about it online, and it really is not what I was expecting. I picked it up because it was titled Assistant to the Villain, but she isn't really an assistant, you know? I thought that the assistant to the villain would be running around doing weird stuff for the villain, but she's more of like a personal secretary for him. It's kind of very much an office type setting. There were a lot of things about this that just didn't work for me. Mostly starting with the writing. I feel like this book needed more editing or more direction. I feel like this book was just scenes written and kind of smashed together. Like there are a lot of popular and common fantasy romance tropes here that people really like. So there's a fake dating scene, and there's a touch her and you die scene, and those are really popular, and that's great. But I feel like they didn't really have anything between them. They were just smashed together. And that's what the whole book felt like. The plot felt almost like an afterthought. This book is supposed to be for an adult audience, but the humor and a lot of aspects of it felt very YA, and the main character herself feels very juvenile, almost in a middle grade sort of way. I was not sold on her humor or her character. Everything felt very flat, very surface level. I didn't feel invested in the characters at all. I will say the villain does have a pet frog named Kingsley. He wears a crown and he holds up signs to communicate. And I honestly feel like I was just reading this book for the frog. Next, I read Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This has got to be one of my favorite books of the year, if not the favorite. I had such a phenomenal time reading this. I knew going into it that Brandon Sanderson had based this off of The Princess Bride, and it was supposed to be a story for his wife to read. And I feel like knowing that, I felt like when he announced these projects, this was the one I was most excited about, because I loved The Princess Bride as a kid. It's one of my favorite films. I watched it all the time. I feel like I have so much childhood nostalgia for that film, for that book. I feel like I knew going into it that this was going to be something special, and it really was. This is the most fun I've ever had in the Cosmere. I felt like I had nostalgic feelings even though I've never read this before. It was just written like a modern fairy tale, and it was so different from anything previously that Sanderson has done. And I really feel like he took a risk here, and I think it worked really well for him. I feel like this is such a timeless story. It does feel like it's written like a modern fairy tale. I think I would love this at the age of 6. I think I would enjoy this at the age of 60, because it really does feel like it is not for any particular audience, but it could be for everyone. And it was just very cozy, very enjoyable. I had to slow myself down while reading it. I was like, I can't read this in one sitting. I have to break it up. I was like making myself read like 1 or 2 chapters a day, so I didn't go through it too quickly. Overall, it was just a gem. Chef's kiss, the whole thing. I don't even have any complaints about it. Switching gears now, I have The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. This is my second attempt at reading Roshani Chokshi, and I'm just not sure that she's the author for me. I gave this book 3 stars because I don't really know how to feel about this book at all. I have very mixed feelings about what I read. So we are following this character. He's simply called the bridegroom. He is never given a name, but he meets this beautiful woman named Indigo, and she says that she'll marry him if he agrees to never look into her past. So he agrees and they get married, but after a while, she gets a letter from home saying that her aunt is sick. So we are following the bridegroom in modern day, and in these flashback chapters, we are seeing Indigo and Azure as children. And I feel like the story has almost that sort of magical realism feeling where you're not sure if something magical really happened or if it's just, you know, the imaginary world that these children have created. And I feel like in the beginning, I was really enjoying what was going on. I was really caught up in the mystery of the story. And the writing is very flowery, which I'm not the biggest fan of. But as the story progressed, we started getting a lot of chapters where things started really feeling repetitive. And I felt like I knew where the story was going. And I was really interested to see where, like, when things would change and when things would get to that point. I wanted to see kind of the downfall of everything. But for the majority of the book, a lot of things are really repetitive, and I just kind of lost interest along the way. Azure and Indigo had a horribly toxic relationship. They had a terrible friendship. I got really tired of reading about their petty drama between one another, and I was really interested in the bridegroom's chapters, but he never really got any development. I never felt any chemistry or believed any of the things between him and Indigo. I never really believed their love for one another or anything like that. So I think he had potential, but he didn't land, and he never even received a name. And I know the point of the story was Indigo, but I wanted this POV chapter to have something better, you know? And I feel like that's probably an unpopular opinion. I feel like everyone loves this one. Like, I haven't seen anybody say anything bad about this book. It does have, you know, a gothic sort of feel to it that I did really enjoy. I did enjoy some of the descriptions, especially of the house and the magic. Next, I have Dark Harvest, and this is a novella taking place in this small town where every year all of the teenage boys get together and they are locked in their rooms and starved for a week before they are let out on Halloween night. Their one objective is to kill the Halloween boy. And the Halloween boy is this magical being that comes out of the pumpkin patch every year. He has the body of vines and he has a jack-o'-lantern head. And he is trying to get to the church to ring the bell, because if he can make it to the church and ring the bell by midnight, he can walk free and live. But if one of these teenage boys kills the Halloween boy, they can leave town. And that is the setup for this story. It feels a bit like The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. It is a very interesting setup, but I, again, did not like this one. I gave it 2.5 stars. I thought it was a great setup. I was really interested in the story in the beginning. I really wanted to know what was up with this October boy and why the town was like it was. My biggest issue with this one was the writing style. It was very choppy and it was a very detached sort of writing style. This does, in some aspects, remind me of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, but also I think that this would be a good read for fans of Stephen King, because I've only read a couple Stephen King books, but of what I have read, This did remind me of that. But overall, the writing style just dragged this down for me. And by the end, we didn't really get the information I wanted. We didn't really get any explanations, and I didn't really like the end. Next up, I have House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. In this book, we're following Sam, who is an archaeoentomologist. Basically, she studies dead bugs for a living. But she gets a call from her brother that their mom is acting very strange. So she decides to go stay with her mom for a time. And something is not quite right about her mom and the house. There are always vultures hanging around. Her mom says and does strange things. She's very jumpy. There's a lot of weird things going on in the house. This is a Southern Gothic story. It is a haunted house story, which I really enjoyed. I gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoy T. Kingfisher's writing. Even though she writes really short books, they do feel really long. And I feel like I'm not missing anything, which is often my complaint with short stories and novellas. But I had a great time with this one. I feel like the Southern aspect was really well done. I really enjoyed the audiobook as well. The narrator just had the best old lady voice. It was so good. She gave a great performance. Our main character, Sam, is a fat woman, and there was like really great representation in there for that, I thought, and I really enjoyed who she was and her sense of self. She was also very sarcastic, and she has a very dry sort of wit that I really like. I will say, though, that the story took a long time to get the ball rolling. It was very much a creepy slow burn, which I did really enjoy, but I do feel like there were gaps of times when things took too long to happen, where we were just like anxiously waiting, which I will say the suspense was great in this. I was wanting to know what was going on, and it definitely kept me reading. I read it in one sitting. It's pretty short. It was at the end. Things took a direction that I wasn't expecting, and I'm not sure that I liked that direction that it took there at the end, but overall, I still had a really great time reading it. I really loved this, the tropes that are utilized in Southern Gothic stories, from, the neighborhood gossip and the nosy neighbor, and I really just love haunted house stories, and I really want more haunted houses in my fantasy books, and I think this one definitely fit the bill. And lastly, I read House of Roots and Ruin by Erin A. Craig. And this one is the spin-off sequel to House of Salt and Sorrows. And in this book, we're following the youngest of the Thomas sisters, Verity, as she is an artist and she wants to go off and explore the world. But the problem is that she is cursed. Her whole family is considered cursed, and she can see ghosts. So that does provide a bit of a problem for her. But she is commissioned to paint the portrait of this prince of this other kingdom, and so she goes off to do just that. But she gets there, and things are very unusual. The house or the manor that they live in is very unusual. There are strange things happening. She discovers some very interesting things about the parents of this prince and their life story. And she does develop feelings for this prince, as one would expect. And I didn't like the story either. Another 2 stars for me. I don't know what's going on. I really loved Erin A. Craig's 2 other works, but this book was not it for me. I feel like this was very insta-lovey from the moment she meets the prince. There is like an insta-love story going on. There is a love triangle. I never believed the chemistry or the relationships between the characters. I just didn't feel that invested in Verity's characters because I felt like she was so stupid. She makes the worst decisions. She doesn't think anything through. I didn't think that this book was spooky or atmospheric in the way that her other 2 books were. And getting back to Verity's stupidity for a second, the end of that book completely just ruined it for me. Verity is an idiot. And from the ending, there's obviously going to be another book. And I won't be reading it, probably. So, because I hate Verity. And the events at the end of that book made me just not interested. So, beyond that, I feel like Erin A. Craig does this thing really well, where she really sets up a creepy atmosphere, and it's got like a nice slow burn, and there is a lot of suspense and tension. But then in this one, I didn't feel that way. We were halfway into the book, and Buddy read this with someone, and we realized we were at the halfway point and nothing had happened at that point. And it wasn't until we had reached about the halfway point that some spooky things had started happening, but it was not nearly spooky enough for my liking. But those were all the books that I read in September. Let me know if you have read any of these and what your thoughts were, because I would love to know. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again with another video soon. Bye.